I stood alone on a desolate road far from anywhere I was from. I was orphaned. No friends, no family, and it didn't matter too much. At 20 years old, I thought I knew it all, but really, I only had bigger balls since my mom died and I was left alone to do whatever I wanted. I leaned against my car. The oppressive heat of the unseasonably hot spring day pressed down on me. The air felt thick and heavy and was hard to take in. I wiped the sweat from my brow and glanced at the deserted road stretching out behind me. It's a rural Kentucky road, surrounded by nothing but fields and trees. A mile in front of me was the nearest town. With a sigh, I pushed myself off the car and started walking. The crunch of the gravel and then the kicking up of dirt marked my trail the whole way. Despite the heat, it only took me 20 minutes to reach the first house on the edge of town. Lac Perdu, they called it. A town which hasn't been printed on maps since the 80s. It looks like the kind of place where time stopped decades ago, frozen in a simpler era. Not that it was falling apart, just that it didn't seem to change much. Each small building pretty much still resembled its vision from when it was first built, whether it was 50 years or 100 years ago. As I strolled along Main Street, I felt eyes on me from all directions. They watched my strides with suspicion. I expected this response from them, but it didn't make it easier. A stranger walking into their quiet little town must be a rare occurrence indeed. I passed by a diner, a full-service gas station, and then an ice cream stand, each one a relic of a bygone era. They looked more like a museum display than a real functional place. I kept walking. My ego drove me forward until I reached an old mechanic shop past the majority of town. The sign creaked in the warm breeze. Its paint appeared newly touched up and bright. It fit in with the theme in town. New, but old. Turning back, I noticed something odd. The road my car was parked on wasn't paved, yet the street in town was paved smooth as glass, and not a single traffic light or stop sign in sight. In fact, there wasn't a single sign of any kind. I didn't even know what street I was on. Obviously a main street of some sort. The town exists in its own little bubble, cut off from the outside world. Not entirely, but enough and in every way that matters. With a shiver, I quickened my pace, eager to unravel the mysteries of this forgotten place. The name in English translated to Lost Lake. Maybe they thought Lac Perdu sounded better. But I knew one thing I barely even admitted to myself. I took this journey knowing it would change my life forever. But I didn't know if this change would be for better or worse. I pushed open the door to the mechanic shop, the bell above jingling softly as I stepped inside. The air was heavy with the scent of grease and oil, mingling with the heat of the unseasonably warm spring day. No air conditioning, and the coolness of the morning was already worn out. The shop was well lit and pretty organized. "Hey there," a voice called out from behind the counter. I made my way over, spotting a man with greasy hands. The cursive embroidery on his open shirt said his name was Ira. "Hi," I reply, trying to sound casual as I try not to look at his bare chest and torso. I have a car out on the road." I stumbled through my words and reminded myself to remain honest. Ira raised an eyebrow, studying me for a moment longer. As if he knew the longer he stared, the more uncomfortable I'd get. Finally, he nodded and said, "Sure thing." He moved to button up his shirt, and I quickly looked away as he smiled at my obviously watching him. He asked, "How did you end up all the way here anyway?" "What do you mean?" I said. He continued, "Here in Lac Perdu. Not exactly on the way to anything, you know." I nod, a nervous flutter danced in my stomach. He's right, of course. You practically have to go out of your way to find this place. Surrounded by a curve of the Ohio River with no bridges, it's standing alone in the northeasternmost corner of Kentucky. Not on the way to anywhere. "Yeah, I know," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Just a stroke of bad luck, I guess." Ira eyed me suspiciously as if trying to decipher the truth hidden behind my words. "Well, let's get your car fixed up then," he said finally, reaching out for my keys. I hand them over reluctantly and explain where it's at. It seemed as if he already knew due to the lack of ways to get in and out of this place. He reshuffled the keys in his hands until he saw the triangle rainbow chain. He didn't look at me or react in any way. I watched him from behind as he shuffled over to a beat-up tow truck parked out on the side of the building. After one final attempt at trying to figure me out by staring at me, he drove off, leaving me alone in his neat little space. His vehicle being so loud and so alone in the town, I was sure I could hear it drive all the way down the road the full mile to my parked car. I looked around, my eyes falling on the drawers and shelves lining the back wall of the shop. Auto parts of all shapes and sizes were organized and labeled by year, starting from right to left. But what caught my eye was the quantity of old versus the new ones. There were as many 1960 parts as there were 1990 parts. Why would he need to store such an equal balance of vehicles, which were mostly no longer in use anymore? I walked down the counter, reading everything as quickly but carefully as I could. I even ran a finger over one of the drawer handles and realized there wasn't even any dust on them. Before I could ponder the significance of it all, a voice quickly slapped me from behind. "Can I help you with something?" came a woman's voice. I turned, expecting to see another store employee or maybe just a concerned citizen. Instead, I was caught off guard when I saw it was a cop standing in the doorway, her eyes curious yet guarded. She introduced herself as Sheriff Bowler. Her expression was unreadable as she eyed me up and down. When I saw the very real gun holstered at her side, I began to really think about what I was doing for the first time. Though these thoughts should have came a long time before I stood alone inside an auto shop in a strange town no one remembers anymore. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice firm but not unkind. I took less time to tell her the same story I told Ira. "We're not exactly on the way to anything," she said, echoing Ira's earlier sentiment. "They built the paper mills where there are no people, and we're still even 20 miles after those." I bristled slightly at her suspicion. I've been nothing but polite since I arrived. It was more for my safety than anything else. But it was time to stop offering this courtesy if it wasn't going to be returned. Hers and mine patience ran out at about the same time. "Am I still in the United States?" I asked. "And have I broken any laws?" She shook her head. "We don't get many strangers in these parts." I laughed, trying to understand if she was serious or playing a caricature of herself. "It's still 2024, right? I didn't fall back in time or anything like that, have I?" She remained serious while shaking her head in the negative. We waited in uncomfortable silence. The town outside provided practically no background noise to pass the time. Finally, Ira returned with my car hooked to the tow. Sheriff Bowler stepped outside to talk to him, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't hear what they were saying. It wasn't normal. Why would she confer with him? Shouldn't she confer with other police? If she had legit concerns, shouldn't she have called for more backup? I shouldn't be upset about this, but it didn't add up. When they noticed my attempted eavesdropping, they stopped talking and exchanged a quick glance before I joined them outside. I didn't realize how warm it was inside until I was hit with a breeze cooler than the stale interior air. We watched as Ira unhitched my car, the tension thickening with each passing moment. I knew how the silent tactic works. The longer you stay quiet, the more the other person wants to speak. So I decided to make the situation even more uncomfortable. I asked about the town mayor. Neither Ira nor Sheriff Bowler responded to any of my questions about him, good or bad. They only exchanged another glance between them. "I heard his name is Edmund Martin," I say casually. "But that the people call him Ed? Surely in a town this big you know exactly who I'm talking about." And they still didn't respond to my inquiry. Ira swallowed and broke eye contact with me before saying, "I couldn't find anything wrong with your car. It started fine and runs great." I never said there was anything wrong with it. The waves of frustration broadcast from him when he realized he towed my car for nothing. Sheriff Bowler narrowed her eyes at me, her suspicion renewed. "What are you really doing here? Tell me, who are you?" I shrugged, deciding to push it all the way up to 100 and not waste any more time. Does Mayor Martin usually have affairs with random women, or is it a rare occurrence? Before anyone could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. I don't have random affairs. Who the hell are you? I turned to see Mayor Martin himself standing behind me, his expression shocked into change as he looked into my eyes. The mayor stood before me with a look of recognition in his eyes as he studied my face. We both sensed something the others couldn't see. But as quickly as it happened, we both looked away, pretending as if it wasn't as profound a discovery as it was. Sheriff Bowler's voice broke the tense silence. Who are you to come into our town speaking so rudely? Her eyes ignited with anger. Ira shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly unsure of what to do. Mayor Martin, on the other hand, seemed frozen, his expression betraying the truth only he and I knew. Back away from him, he said to the sheriff, his voice firm but calm. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. Let him be. But Ed, Bowler protested. He silenced her with a gentle hand on her shoulder before stepping back. Everyone just calm down, Mayor Martin said, his voice soothing. But the tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken words and hidden truths. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as I met Ira's gaze. The mayor turned to me, his expression unreadable. Who are you and what do you know? He asked quietly. I met his gaze head-on, knowing I've crossed several lines but unable to stop now. I'm Jason McKenzie. When I say my last name, his ears shift with the rest of their dropped expressions. I know no one here dies, I reply, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. Everyone here lives forever, near the fountain of youth. The truth never sounded so absurd. The first time I said the words out loud, the first time I repeated the crazy things my mother told me, could be told to me 1,000 times before I believed them myself. Ira and the sheriff stepped back, their breaths coming faster as they exchanged a glance of disbelief. Bowler demanded, Who told you that? Validation swept over me in waves of terror. No one warned me how tragically shocking it would be to prove myself right after a lifetime of believing I was wrong. No one warned me how empty becoming whole again would feel. The mayor tried to calm her again, but his words were lost in the sudden commotion coming from outside. A dozen townspeople gathered, their curious faces peering through the windows to see what was going on. It's true, isn't it? I said. My voice rang out in the sudden silence. None of you deny it. And they didn't. As I stood there surrounded by the people, I knew I've crossed a line. But I also knew my journey here, my research into this town and its secrets, led me to this moment, and there was no turning back. The tension eased slightly as the mayor once again asked for calm. The townsfolk may not have acted like a rabid mob, but the way they surrounded me, the way they circled me, made it harder to breathe. They simply hadn't dealt with an intruder like me before, and they certainly hadn't planned what to do if someone found out their secret. But one thing was clear. They trusted the mayor implicitly, as they had for a very, very long time. They would remain calm, because he asked them to. The mayor turned his gaze back to me. His eyes jumped through every emotion in the book. What is your mother's name? He asked gently. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his gaze upon me. You already know, I reply, my voice barely above a whisper. After a simple pause, the mayor's next question caught me off guard, though it was expected. Where is she? Is she well? I shook my head once, the memories flooded back. It happened suddenly, I said, my voice catching in my throat. 6 months ago. Mayor Edmund's expression darkened, his features contorted with grief. She wasn't a random affair, he said finally, his voice raw with emotion. I did care a lot about her. But it wasn't enough. We weren't enough for her to stay. I didn't know about you if I did. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. A tear escaped from my eye and Ira stepped forward to offer me a clean tissue. I took it gratefully, wiping away the tears which threatened to spill over. And nobody gets to live forever, Edmund continued, his voice steady, despite the tears which shimmered in his eyes. We here are fortunate enough to live a lot slower. By this time, more people gathered, their curious looks bordering on outright fear. But Edmonds didn't falter, his gaze locked with mine. "Everyone," he said with a tearful nod. "He doesn't just have his mother, Julie Mackenzie's eyes, but he has my father's chin. He has my mother's smile, a smile I haven't seen in ages. I thought I'd never see it again." He paused to gather himself before he could continue. "My son has found his way home." As Edmund and I shared a moment of understanding, he turned to Ira and asked him to show me around town while he prepared his spare room. Ira nodded with a smile, and we set off together, slowly strolling through the quiet 4 square blocks which made up Lac Perdu. As we walked, Ira pointed out the different people who called this town home. There's Paul, the gas station attendant, who came here in the 1980s and has changed very little since. Then there's Merle, who runs the diner. She's been here since the early 1800s, but she's always been one of the first to embrace new things and get excited about changes in technology. I couldn't help but ask about the guy who owns the auto shop, and Ira smiled knowingly. He explains, "I came here with my mother when I was 13. She was already on her last breaths, and I've been here ever since." I knew I'd have time to find out more details, so I let him leave his mother's memory at that point. "When was that? When did you come here?" I asked, unable to leave this one question alone. 1902, Ira said without hesitation. Then I had one more question that needed to be answered right away. Doesn't it all become boring? Doesn't living forever kind of come with a lot of problems? He shook his head. "No, we all still have an end date, even if it's far away. Our lives are still urgent and still have meaning. And we're all here together, so we don't have to see the people we care about die over and over again." At first I thought, someday I'd reach a point where it all became redundant. But it hasn't yet. Not for me, not for anyone here. At this point, I don't think it will. We walked in silence for a moment, the weight of Ira's words sinking in as I silently do the math to realize how old he actually was. But before I can dwell on it too long, Ira continues, his voice low and steady. "There's a spring beneath a lake just out of town," he said. "You have to really know it's there to find it. We drink from it once every moon, and from our best observations, we only age 1 year closer to death for every 10 years which passes." I was good at pretending I was able to take it all in. At least Ira let me believe I was. Though everything settled down, there were still people along the walk who were very interested in my arrival. "Most people never leave," Ira said quietly. "Your mother was one of the very, very few who did." I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness at his words. "I think leaving this place is what destroyed her," I said softly. Ira nodded as we reached the edge of town. I continued, "But I knew before I started this trip. I knew if it were all true, I wouldn't make the same mistakes that she did. I wouldn't leave. I'd want to see where this story goes, even if it was going to be a long, boring one." With this, we both smiled at each other, a shared understanding passing between us as we continued walking. The small, dead-end town stretched before us as if it were made of endless roads of possibilities.